Hello and welcome to Midwest Writers Room. Our mission is to encourage, educate, and celebrate writers of the Midwest. I'm Luella Schmidt.
And I'm Ken Humphrey. Today we're interviewing Michael Carr from Veritas Literary. Michael has a background in editing and writing and represents writers in a variety of genres with special emphasis on historical fiction, mystery and suspense, and science fiction and fantasy.
Michael works carefully with clients to produce the cleanest, most professional manuscripts and enjoys teaching at workshops and conferences to help develop emerging writers. He speaks Brazilian, Portuguese, and Swahili, and before joining Veritas, he had professions as diverse as programming simulators for nuclear submarines and owning an inn in Vermont. We're so excited to talk to you, Michael. Welcome to Midwest Writers Room. How you doing
Thank
today?
you. It's nice to be here with you. I look forward to our conversation.
Yeah, I think this will be a good episode. So before we talk about just life in general and Veritas Literary, first thing, I may be putting you on the spot a bit here, but I grew up reading science fiction fantasy. Those were my go-to genres as a kid. And so besides, the big names that are out there, like the Sandersons, like the Tolkiens, what is a fantasy book or series that flies under the radar that you think more people need to read? Do you have one off the top of your head?
Yeah, well, I like I like some of the big names out there too. I like reading N.K. Jemisin, for example, and anything by Victoria Schwab. I love her writing. But I read a book recently by Valerie Valdez, and it's called When Peace Fails, I believe. And I was interested. I looked it up on Goodreads, curious how I'd never heard of the writer, but it was in my local library branch, and they're kind of smallish science fiction and fantasy section, and I was interested in picking something up and grabbed it without having heard of the writer. But I really liked her kind of a cozy science fantasy sort of a book. That's a recent read of mine that I would recommend.
Okay.
But I do read, I read a lot of the big names too. I have to, of course, because I need to stay on top of some of the genre trends because I also grew up as a big science fiction fantasy guy, and so that's some of my bread and butter.
Yep. The one I drop whenever I think of that question, the one that always comes to my mind. Now, I don't know if you've heard of this. It's Kings of the Wild by Nicholas Eames, which
Uh,
is it's a fantasy, but it's a rock and roll fantasy.
yeah.
Typical storyline, but it's all set within a rock genre. Like all the names and labels and references, kind of relate to the rock world. And it was just a cool breath of fresh air. And just like you, I found that book in the library on a cruise ship about a decade or so ago and just was just struck by it. So good.
Yeah, the one I mentioned, I looked at Goodreads, and it's not like it's been a disaster or anything. Has a fair number of reviews, but not to the level I would have maybe expected. You'll have to send me that book after our podcast because I'm also kind of a rock and metal guy. So that actually sounds like it's up my alley. I haven't read it, but
Yep, I will send you the link to that. All right, so let's dig into you. Before we talk about where you are today, we gotta start with where you came from. So besides programming nuclear submarines off the coast of Vermont, like talk us through the path and what led you to where you are today as a literary agent.
yeah, so I was one of those guys, one of those people as a kid, and probably both of you were as well. I found almost everybody who works as either an editor, writer, or literary agent was one of the ones with their nose in a book that the teacher goes in a fourth, fifth grade from trying to encourage reading to telling you to put your book down. So going to the library and having the librarian say, are you going to actually read all of those? And yes, in fact, reading all of them. So I was a huge reader as a kid, kind of a storyteller too. So when I would get together with my friends, or my brother would have the typical imaginary games, and I was the one who would be telling the story. I was the one who was the DM playing Dungeons and Dragons. So I liked to tell the story and make up the story. So I do have a writing background myself. I've had some publications. I went to Clarion when I was younger, which is a workshop for science fiction and fantasy writers. It was in, I think they've moved, but it was at Michigan State at the time. And studied under Karen Joy Fowler, Tim Powers, some other writers as well. And I ended up, in addition to writing, I would do freelance editing and some dev editing. And that was kind of my transition into agenting. I can get more into that if you want more detail, or that might be sufficient.
Well, and I would probably be remiss if we didn't dig more into the programming simulators for nuclear submarines. How does one fall into that? I'm like, how did you get there?
Well, so I have a degree in English, and also have a degree in computer science. So my first job was actually not nearly as sexy sounding. It was sizing software for industrial valves. But I usually leave that off. It doesn't sound particularly interesting. And then I had this job offer. It was actually in Rhode Island. And I was living out west at the time and moved out to Rhode Island and was working on the Virginia class nuclear submarine project with Lockheed Martin, defense contractor. But I actually, my coworkers, when we were on lunch break or whatever, they would talk about the computers they were building at home. They would talk about little software projects they had on the side, and my heart wasn't all that into it. It sounds nuclear submarine sounds exciting, but it's still all pointers and for loops. So then I ended up buying an inn in Vermont, and I ran that for a number of years, including some time when I was overlapping as an agent. It's not rapid process to get yourself into agenting and actually earn a living at it. And then eventually sold the inn. And that was a lot, in terms of I was very busy with that job, running an inn. It's not so much, when you live on site, it's not so much working at home so much as living at work. And the phone can ring at any time. There's always someone coming in to interrupt. But there were a couple of down periods every year after the ski season closed in like April, May. It was very slow. And then late after fall foliage had ended, but before the snows came back around Christmas was another slow period of time. So as someone who is transitioning into another career, those are great times to write, to edit, to take on new agenting projects. So doing all of my reading at those times, really getting caught up in the slush pile, and then taking on new writers, and then working with them over time. And that's kind of how I made the transition. Then that eventually got busy enough. I had to move off site, hire an innkeeper, and I had that for a few years before I ended up just selling the inn altogether. And that was in 2015.
All right, very good. And so, just for listeners out there, pointers and for loops are technical jargon. And if you want to throw somebody off and make yourself sound smart, just throw that phrase into a conversation and see what happens. So, coming out of the emerging from the submarine, talk to us a little bit about Veritas Literary. Was it a literary agency you started? Was it existing? How long has it been around? What is it all
Yeah,
about?
so it was founded by my colleague, Catherine Boyle, and I think she started it in the mid 90s, maybe. So she'd been in agenting for about 15 years already. And I was doing some dev editing and came across, I had worked with her in the past, and I found this project that I was really, really close to professional level. It was a YA fantasy novel. And I said, hey, I found this manuscript. She's really good, younger writer, and you should consider taking it on. She looked at it, signed the author, and then sold the book, and then said to me, I feel like I should offer you like a finder's fee on this first contract, like 25%. And if you're in a creative field and anyone ever offers you money, you need to take it. So I took the money, and then not too long after that, I found another project and had the same conversation with her. I said, yeah, I think you should take this writer on. She's really good. And she said, maybe you should consider representing it yourself. And I said, well, I have no editor contracts. I don't know any contacts. I have no clue about contracts in the industry. And, what are the like legal stuff? And she said, well, you can learn all of that stuff. That's the easy part. The hard part is to have a good eye for identifying fiction and knowing where it falls down. And these are areas where you're strong at. So I took her on, and that was my first writer. And there's only two of us at the agency. There have been a couple of other times throughout the years when Katie has had someone else with the agency, but it's just two of us, and we both pretty much work completely independently. So she handles the business side and money and that sort of thing. But I suppose I could at this point start my own agency, but you know, this allows me to stay focused on the books, and I have complete creative control over what I want to take on.
Very cool. So we're talking now probably what, 10 so years that you've been with Veritas?
Yeah, well, that was in 2010.
Okay.
So to give some realistic idea, because agenting is a great field. I really like it. It has a lot of flexibility, especially nowadays where you don't have to live in New York and meet editors in person. There was a time when the whole industry was just concentrated in one place, but everybody lives virtually now. That was already partly the case when I started, and especially now. But to give an idea, my first year agenting, I think I made about $1,500. So do not get into it unless you have some other support. It's kind of a shame because you need to have some other job. You need to have a partner who will support you, own an inn in Vermont that pays your living expenses, whatever it is. But I think it was 4 or 5 years of working at it before I started thinking, okay, now this is a real salary. The beginnings of one anyway. There's such a delay in everything. It takes a long time to bring someone on, contracts start, it's slow process in the payout. So a lot of those contracts don't earn out or it takes some years to earn out, but things start to accumulate over time. Just as a little bit of cold water in the face sometimes for people who want to get into it, which is not to say it isn't worth it if someone is really interested in the agenting side. It can be a great career.
Yeah, and we heard that before, right? There's a bit of a slow burn before you
Yeah.
really get traction and start, bringing in the authors. So let's spend a minute talking about that. I mean, are you deluged with new authors coming at you, or do you have to go out and seek out authors? How do you keep your pipeline fresh?
Well, so the instant you declare yourself as an agent, there's a fire hose of queries that are going to be coming in. You just put your name up there. Someone could have no clue what they're doing, no experience whatsoever, not even be attached to an agency. Could be some 18-year-old kid who is just doing it as a joke. I don't know, maybe query manager vets people. They probably do, but it wouldn't be that hard to start off. And then over time, it will build up. Right now, I'm getting approximately 7,000 queries a year, to give an example. So 150 maybe a week. So it is really, really challenging to get through. Some of the authors I represent, I have a few books that, I could show at some point of people who've come of different ways. This author right here, there's a memoir, um, Flesh and Blood. And this was a recommendation from another author I represent, and I know that when the authors I represent recommend someone, that's a currency that they're using cautiously. They're not going to just mention anyone, so I pay attention. Most of the time, I don't end up signing that person either, but the odds of them being pretty good or pretty close is high. So sometimes I get them that way. However, the author in question who recommended her came to me just as a query, and that's Ellen Marie Wiseman, and she's a New York Times bestseller now, but didn't start off that way. We started off with modest advances, and then this was another author that came from just querying me. And then one of my bigger name fantasy writers, I think we've done 19 or 20 books with Orbit now, David Dalglish, and he's someone who I met online and knew him a little bit before he had been an indie writer at one point, and then he had some interest come in and knew me and trusted me. So they can come from different places. I have two authors right now who I represent, who I met at conferences last year. And one at the San Francisco Writers Conference in February, and the other one at a workshop in Utah for YA and middle grade writers in June. And we're out on submission with their books right now. So that can sometimes play out as well. So I would say it depends. It's probably, a third conferences, a third queries, and a third recommended from someone else I know or trust. And that has shifted somewhat away from queries over time. Just I have more other people coming to me. Early on, it was mostly just queries, but I'm still open to queries. I still look at those. It's just a high bar to get over, unfortunately.
It is. We all know that. And I will say, Luella, this is probably the most in-depth answer we've gotten from an agent as to how they feed their pipeline. So thank you, Michael, for that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, should we dive into the message, Luella?
You bet.
Okay, for everybody out there, calling all romance authors. On February 14th, WWA is opening submissions to an anthology we're publishing in 2027. It's going to be called The Harvest of Romance. The submission window closes May 1st, so don't delay. Get your romantic piece in now. Learn more at wiwrite.org.
I'm really excited about this project for the WWA Press. It's going to be a fun one. And I want the listeners to know that Ken already suggested that we submit it. Can I tell on you?
It's going to be our initial effort, but we're going to both do it.
Are you going to collaborate? Are you going to collaborate, or are you going to write separate stories?
I don't know. What are we doing? Are we both going to do it?
Separate. I don't want to take it too deep a leap in this.
Yeah. That'd be a lot of work to work together that much.
Though collaborations can sometimes be educational. You can learn some things, and one of you could write Luella, you could write the male POV character, and Ken could write the female, and then you could each offer a little criticism on what it's like to write opposite gender POVs and if they're pulling
it off. Oh my gosh, listen, Michael, trying to make us better writers, Ken. I appreciate that. Good idea. All right, back to you, sir. So before I ask you a question, can I just point out that since we've chatted with you, I've learned that I feel like languages are so huge. Like you mentioned the three that you speak well, but also computer science is a language and also English. I just feel like they all have the exact same sort of, I don't know, same sort of brain that is just able to understand languages. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, there's something about certain brains that are able to kind of understand languages.
Maybe I always give the caveat that I feel like I was a mediocre computer programmer. I didn't ever get like bad reviews or anything, but I feel like the areas in life where I've been really good at is where a little bit of natural ability comes together with some motivation and some desire to improve. And it's like with foreign language, I was indifferent as a student up through college and was okay, but I never bothered to learn like Spanish. And then as an adult, at some point, it just kind of triggered something and found I was pretty good at it, but that was because I liked it. I put my effort into it. So I don't think I was a natural fit for computer programming.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Sure. So what kind of we want to kind of give our listeners, our writer listeners, some advice on, if they're seeking an agent or they're seeking publication, what kind of advice would you like them to hear?
Well, so I think the most important thing is to be able to prioritize your long-term goals over your short-term mood. We almost never sit down and love the act of writing. It's difficult. It takes a lot of effort. After the fact, if you find that you really just hate it, there's no shame. It's hard enough to break into. There's no shame in just saying I'm a hobbyist or this is not really what I want. And you can't actually control the level of success you're going to have at any stage. every writer I represent, whatever, wherever they're at, they would love to be the next. If that's someone whose manuscript we've gone out with and it hasn't sold, which happens, obviously they're this close and haven't got it. But then there's other books that, I wanted to use this as an example of a book. This author sadly passed away, but she wouldn't mind me talking about it because she was very helpful to aspiring writers. And this is a wonderful retelling of the Robin Hood story from Maid Marian's point of view, and Robin Hood's kind of an arrogant jerk in this. And but the book came out. It was the editing was really good. It's a lovely looking book, has good reviews, and it just the sales were just a little disappointing from what everybody had hoped for in terms of uh, the editor's advance and how much publicity they put into it. And you just can't control that. Ellen Marie Wiseman, who I mentioned, is a multiple New York Times bestseller. Her second novel, she'd worked on her first book for a long time, and her second novel, she was convinced was going to destroy her. And that book has been translated into like 20 languages now and has sold a million or 2 million copies. I don't know. It's still her best-selling novel. It never hit the list, but it just has continued to sell over the years. So we can't actually control how things are going to turn out, but what we can control is our production. So if you're an aspiring writer, I always tell people it's tempting to compare yourself to other people in your writing group. And well, this person's still been working on this novel for 3 years. I wrote a novel in a year and a half. But people who've broken in, who will speak to you frankly, some people mythologize a little bit, but someone who has broken in, maybe that was their sixth or seventh novel that they wrote. Have a be I'm not saying your first novel should be just practice or you should never aspire to train. You always need to put your work out there and let the world decide once you've done the best that you can. But you need to ask yourself, am I expecting professional results on part-time effort? It's not easy. But this breaking in and becoming a novelist is kind of akin to being a professional actor on Broadway or in film, or being a professional athlete in terms of the number of people who want it, who have some talent to get started, and the number of positions there are. You can't control a lot of that, but what you can do is to work harder than other people, to work smarter, to workshop your work, to read a lot about the art, to read books that are successful and break them down and analyze them, to analyze where you're going wrong, if it's appropriate to hire a dev editor, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And so you can control those sort of things. I mentioned earlier I'm getting about 7,000 queries a year, but your competition, I don't think, is actually with those 7,000. The people who are listening to this, not everybody, some of them are going to be just curious, but the people who are listening to this are probably more serious. Most of those people are probably in competition with about 700, not 7,000, just by being a little bit more, having a little bit more intent as to what you're doing. I was reading queries this morning and I saw someone who sent their first 5 pages was every paragraph was one single declarative sentence for 5 pages. And I thought, has this person read a novel before? Like, does this person, I mean, I don't want to be too, everyone's got to start somewhere. Maybe it was like a 15-year-old kid. I don't know. But you're not in competition with that person realistically for whatever reason. But you still have to know 700 is still a hell of a lot of people, right? 70 would be a lot of people. So I might sign, last year I signed 3 authors. The year before I only signed one. I don't know. 2 or 3 is typical. Now I'm not brand new. Maybe a brand new agent might sign 6 or 8. And even someone who has a lot of experience that you need to kind of replenish your list over time. But it's hard to break in. So control it, make sure you're putting out your best work. There's a lot of other things that go into it, but you have to be enjoying the process too if you're hating it. Not saying you have to love writing at every moment, but there has to be some reward. The writing itself has to be some reward. Otherwise, you're probably going to give up.
Man, that is a lot of really great advice. I
Maybe
especially
too much
liked,
all at once.
no, I mean, my favorite was like prioritize your long-term goals over your short-term mood. Like that is like operating Luella Schmidt.
I don't, I didn't come up with, I don't remember where I heard that and if I'm paraphrasing something, but someone said something along those lines once at a conference I was at, and it really struck me as true. It's
No
the same
kidding.
for almost anything difficult you want to accomplish. That's what I use when I'm studying Swahili, for example, is I really don't want to have my Swahili class right now, but I know if I don't have 3 or 4 of these a week over 5 or 6 years, I'm not going to learn the language, and that's how I learned the language. It would be the same for learning a musical instrument or having a beautiful garden or anything that requires self-driven motivation, I would say.
Yes. I really liked that a lot. Can you share a little bit if you have advice for all of us who are, are dealing with rejection and how to kind of hold that a little healthier?
I mean, it's an unfortunate part of the business. I very recently I'm out with a manuscript right now, and a couple of weeks ago heard from an acquiring editor who said, I really love this book. I've sent it out for some other reads, and I want to take it to Ed Board either this date or the following week, depending on when I can get it. Well, I needed to talk to the author about that, a debut novelist. I needed to talk to him because at that point I need to let the other editors know that something might be brewing and we need to have something. If other people want to jump on top of it, they need to do that. But I also needed to, I've been in this business a long time. That's a fantastic sign, but it's not a done deal. So I said, well, cautions, cautions, but whatever. This is great. This would be a great editor. Um, we'll keep our fingers crossed. And then just a couple of days ago, I heard from him saying, yeah, unfortunately, I went out and a couple of people resisted, and we have to have everyone buy into it from the representative to the big book buyers and marketing, blah, blah, blah. And I was unable to get the buy-in. And this is an editor who's not brand new. So you would not think he's not a junior editor who really needs to get it past a higher up editor. He just couldn't get it past acquisitions. And boy, that was a hard conversation to have with the writer. I felt like a gut kick for me. Debut novels, selling a debut novel is my favorite thing, even more than like a six-figure contract. I get a bigger rush out of selling someone's debut novel for 10 or 15,000 than getting 6 figures from someone. Obviously the 6 figures is what pays my living expenses here in San Francisco. But um, rejection is a part of life. I've got every book I go out with is going to get a lot of rejections, even the ones that sell. Frequently, we're only one, maybe two rejections away from. And similarly, sometimes I get a book that got really close. I have another writer. Her book was wonderful. I have no idea why it didn't sell. She just about a week ago sent me her new book, which I'm also really enjoying. But there was one junior editor who read it in a weekend, couldn't get her boss to sign on. And that was the previous time, about a year and a half ago, where I went to and had it go to an ed board and failed. So, what can you do? I tell people there comes a point when your book needs to go out. You've polished it, you've done the best you can, you've put together a professional query letter, or maybe you have an agent and they're going out. That's a perfect time to get started on the next project. Because, first of all, the industry moves super, super slowly. And so as you're querying, that's going to be a process of months. And then months more maybe before you go on submission. And then another year, year and a half or so before it is published. You can't sit around waiting for stuff to happen. You need to start working on something else. It helps psychologically if your head is already in the game somewhere else, right? Because worst case scenario, you fall short, but you'll be like, well, wait till they see this. I'm somewhere else. I'm living and breathing with these other characters and other storyline. I think it can really, really help overcome that psychological difficulty. And then at some point, maybe you still believe in that other book, you set it aside or whatnot, but you just have to assume at every step of the way, no matter how big a name you're going to be. There are people who go to the Oscars nominated multiple times and they still don't win the Oscar, but they obviously have these fantastic careers that they're being nominated. They're still getting rejected and it still feels like a blow. Those are the kind of rejections we hope we're getting. We feel like, well, yeah, whatever. I can't get an agent. But
That would be nice.
still,
Yes.
a rejection is a part of this. You're going to have a book that sells well, but there are going to be reviewers who say it's the biggest pile of steaming dung they've ever read in their life. And it's horrible for writers to read that, no matter how many copies they've sold. So unfortunately, it's just a part of the game.
Yeah. I like that advice. And I think that we've heard that from other people, Ken, or I've heard it somewhere, to just start working on the next project. Like if it's really for the love of writing and then the enjoyment of it, that's what you should do.
Yep, always
Um,
forward momentum.
yeah, that's good
Yeah.
advice.
You
All
can't,
right. Well,
obviously there's the opposite situation of the person who continually writes just first drafts. And they either shelf the first draft because they're comparing the book that was in their head with the first draft that came out with the polished novel that they just read that they loved, and they know how much they're falling short and are just paralyzed by that. Or they're so in love with the first draft that they just rush it out the door in a few weeks. You can't do that either.
yeah.
But there does come a point, I think it's more common for people to like, what are you working on? I run into them at how did things go with that book? Well, I'm going through another round of revisions. Man, you went out to how many agents and it was rejected? Might be time to set that aside and work on something else.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's dig into a good question for somebody with a computer science background. Tell us a little bit about your take on an AI and how you're seeing it used in the industry, and just give us kind of your feel for that.
Well, so to start with, I don't love AI. And I feel like in some ways society needs to ask itself, I guess one thing to automate coal mining. Nobody dreams of working in a coal mine, right? But it's another thing to take away those sorts of jobs that people like to do, especially writing and art and music, things that people do for free, whether they're getting paid or published or record deals or whatnot anyway. So do we really want our book narrators to be AI, even if they're really good? Uh, Same thing with like, and right now you can tell covers. I feel like writing AI is just nowhere near good enough to simulate being an actual writer, but I'm not so confident that will be the case in 5 or 10 years. Do we really want to do that and then all the money, what there is, in creative work to then be concentrated once again in tech companies? Does tech need more of that money? And I'm living in a tech capital of the world here in San Francisco, close to Silicon Valley. So it's not like I'm not a Luddite either. I don't love it, and I really am suspicious of writers who'd want to lean on it too much. Isn't the kind of finding out and discovery using your own creative energy the enjoyment of it too? As a writer, isn't a lot of the joy the same thing that a reader has, except it plays out over time? Like a historical novelist, have you ever read a historical novel and you step out of it and suddenly you were so immersed in the book and you half expect to look around and find yourself in 14th century Florence or whatever. Well, a writer's world is like that too. Like except instead of 6 hours being immersed in the Fellowship of the Rings as a reader, you're immersed for 6 months in the fantasy world you've been creating from the ground up. So why do you want to outsource that to a computer? I don't know. I mean, I do think we, at the same time, we have to be prepared. I think it's hitting probably some kinds of editors harder. Like, I wouldn't want to be a freelance copy editor right now because some of the tools like even just using Grammarly. I've noticed that manuscripts now are a lot cleaner than they were 10 years ago. I think people just run it through some sort of AI or AI adjacent tool. And so there's just a lot fewer typos, lot fewer confusing there and there, which like when you're typing and you're editing your own stuff, you're even if you can know very well that that's not the word, but you just gloss over it. And so that isn't terrible. Um, I would I've sometimes suggested to authors who are stuck on a title to like plug a bunch of elements into AI and then see if you can come up with just like 50 titles. And then the AI rarely comes up with the title, but it will sometimes come up with things that'll jog someone's creative energy. I think that that's okay if you're using it as a creative tool, but you don't want to use it in such a way that your brain is going to atrophy, your creative energy is going to atrophy. That anytime you want, like, oh, give me a description of a cold weather day when people are going through a fantasy world using metaphors that are, you know what I mean? Come up with that sort of stuff yourself, even if you can and you can get away with it. I just think it's going to leave you a weaker writer. And who knows, what, 5 years from now, 5 months from now, I don't know, someone might come out with some thing that can create a best-selling novel in 2 minutes running it through an AI. I hope not. But
Oh, I doubt it. But I mean, I think it's going to be close. But I think,
I doubt it, but I also remember back, in the 90s when people would say that you'd never be able to build a computer program that could beat a human at chess
sure.
because chess was just too complicated and required too much thinking ahead. And now the best grandmasters have trouble even understanding what the top chess engines are even going for, what their strategies are, that they're playing for such minimal gains that cascade down the road. So I don't want to say never. I'm not convinced either. Like, we still don't have flying cars. We've been promised self-driving cars were supposedly going to be everywhere by 2020. And, maybe that's coming too. But sometimes these techno utopia things don't pan out as people say. So I hope
Right.
so. I don't think we'll gain anything from it.
Yeah.
That might be a little too Luddite for you if you're
No, no, that was great.
too
I'm
much
I'm
AI
always
positive.
interested. I mean, I'm always interested what people have to say, especially publishers, when you're dealing with it, presumably, or, you're spotting it. The only time I've spotted it in my day-to-day life is in resumes. Like we hired for a position in the WWA and I could see it very obviously in cover letters, and I have not seen it in any submissions yet, but I'm just curious, what it's like from your perspective. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the only
Um,
certainty we have is that we don't have any certainty on where it's going to go because it is
yeah,
evolving so quickly and changing, and it's finding niches for different AI engines. We're starting to see specialization. Like not everything is a chat GPT. They're starting
Yeah.
just to branch off into
yeah,
like research AI or construction AI, these things that have a special focus to them. So that may be where this is headed is the
interesting.
specialty.
Yeah.
All right, Luella, is it time for special sauce?
It's
Speaking of
time for special
specialties.
sauce. So, Michael, as in listeners, just to remind you, our special sauce question is what we always ask our guests to tell us something unusual that you're into, a hobby or a skill or a passion that is not to do with our topic of the day. So, what do you
Yeah.
got for us?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing is languages, right? So you read off that I speak Brazilian, Portuguese, and Swahili. My Portuguese is good enough. I've done podcasts in
Oh,
Portuguese. And I speak Spanish well enough. I've taught courses in Latin America for aspiring writers. But I also, so this is where it starts to get kind of weird because then people are like, really? Because I speak Swahili, but I have a pretty good level of French and Italian. I wouldn't say it's professional, but I can converse about anything. And I'm actually learning German right now. I'm just probably a few years away from being able to confidently say I speak German. So it starts to sound a little strange. I also like to forage mushrooms, wild mushrooms. Um, And so
I have
every
some
like,
family members who
November,
do that
December.
a lot. They
Yeah,
love it. Absolutely love it. I mean, it's a good excuse to hang out in a forest for one thing.
yeah. A couple people just died in the Bay Area from eating death caps, which is funny because there's so many easy death caps are easy enough to recognize if you can, but just avoid white gilled mushrooms and go for things like morels and chanterelles and boletes and it's easy enough to like there's a million mushrooms out there. You just it's like a snake. I don't have to recognize every snake to know that's a rattlesnake, right? And if I don't know what the snake is, I don't pick it up. But once you can recognize a snake, then you know it's harmless. So don't just don't use a mushroom app to identify your mushrooms.
No, that's all you're in your head, huh? You don't have any tools to help you when you're out
No,
there?
but I mean, I've studied carefully, and I mean, there's a lot of times I'm like, I think this is that, but if you're not, yeah, yeah, but yeah, a lot of it is living here in the Bay Area. There's so many wonderful like hikes and forests and coastal areas, and it's the thing. I lived here as a kid, but then didn't live here again for many, many years. But as many people as live in California, you can quickly get to wild areas. So I like to do that a lot.
Right. So besides finding you on the forest scrounging for mushrooms, where can our listeners find you in the virtual world?
Well, so maybe I am a little bit of a Luddite. We have a Twitter account, but neither of us are great at it. Most of the time when I'm out there, it's at things like conferences. So I did a conference in San Diego a few weeks ago, and then next week is the San Francisco Writers Conference, and I do a few of those a year. I feel like it's a way to reverse some of the negative karma that I'm putting out there. Just no, 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 no. I like to dive in and help people with their work and have discussions about their work. I think a lot about how stories are constructed and characters, and I feel like I can bring good energy to the subject too. Um, and stuff I obviously can't do when I have to sit down and go through like 40 or 50 queries right now before I start my actual work. But we have a website, of course, veritasliterary.com, and there's some interviews out there and podcasts and things like this, but I'm not super active on like things like Twitter. Feels like there's so many. I tell this to writers too, like put your effort into what you're good at. If you love engaging with writers, that's great. But there's a lot of people who like, oh, I've just sold my book. I need to now have a presence, and they're not very good at it, and they spend a lot of effort having 20 or 30 followers, half of which are their cousins and parents and
Or
things.
bots?
Yeah, or bots, and you don't know what that is. The
Yeah.
best thing to sell a book is to write another book that's really good. So if you love it, I say go into it. And I don't feel like I love that sort of engagement, if that makes sense.
Here, here.
Funny because I'm kind of a gregarious person at conferences and things. So
All right, Luella,
All right.
time for good news.
Time for some good news, kids. So if you want to send your good news to us, we'd be happy to celebrate with you and shout you out on the podcast. You can email us at podcast@wiwrite.org. Ken, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So when this episode drops, it'll be a day after I had an event at a local Kenosha bookstore, Blue House Books, for my breakfast jury book. However, in addendum to that, I've got an interview with the local NBC outlet, TMJ4, regarding the book as well. So still trying to nail down the times on that, but I'm really looking forward to that. Right, getting some TV exposure. How about you,
Awesome.
Michael? What's your good?
So I have this is not a debut author, but it's a debut in this genre, and it's coming out on the 17th. This is called Birdie. It's a middle grade novel, and by Christie Ottaviano Books, which is an imprint of Little Brown. And it's taken a while to get to this point. There were some delays and things, but I think the book is going to do really well. It's a really touching, heartfelt book, and we got a starred review from Booklist and really positive reviews elsewhere. I think it's going to do great with the school libraries and that sort of thing, which is really important for a debut middle grade. So I'm really excited about that. About a week and a half away from release of that.
Great.
Very
That's excellent.
cool.
Good news.
How
So
about
my
you,
good
Luella?
news, my good news is that I have a lot of fun to look forward to this weekend. I have a friend who's throwing like a winter movie party day, or just hang out and be snuggly and lots of good food with friends. And then I'm going to go see my pal, Ken, at Blue House Books on Sunday. So I'm very excited. Ken and I have seen each other many, many times on Zoom, but we still have not seen each other that many times in person. So I'm always excited to hang out with them and very excited about this event you have going on. So yay.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah. So again, that's podcast at wiwrite.org. Please send us your news. We'll love to celebrate with you.
All right. And so at this time, I want to thank Michael for coming on to us, or coming on to the Midwest Writers Room with us and chatting. I meant it earlier when I said that some of the depth of your answers, Michael, I thought were incredible, right? You just kind of peeled back layers that we may not have always necessarily gotten to, some other guests. I think you do a great job of laying things out. So listeners out there, if you've enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating in your podcast app of choice. This is a type of action that helps everybody else find us, helps grow the program. I want to thank everybody for hanging out with us in the Midwest Writers Room. I'm Ken Humphrey.
And I'm Luella Schmidt. Words ignite imaginations and spark change. Never underestimate the power of storytelling.
Midwest Writers Room is a production of the Wisconsin Writers Association. Writing and editing by Luella Schmidt and Ken Humphrey. Sound design and editing by Ken Humphrey. Music for the Midwest Writers Room was written by Michael Ramir C. For more information, please visit wiwrite.org/podcast. Thank you.